Let's pray. Father, we thank you for both the right and the responsibility to govern that comes from you. We pray that you would give wisdom to our leaders as they seek your will. We pray that your will would be done. We pray that you would bless those who would take the responsibility and take up that mantle to serve us, to serve our state, to serve our country by leading us. And we pray that you would give them wisdom, that you would give them discretion. I pray that you would protect our leaders, that you would protect them physically as they go about the day-to-day service, that you would protect them spiritually as they put a lot on the line, that you would protect them relationally as they interact with each other and with others in our state. I pray that you would show yourself, that you would show yourself as God, the God of the creator of the universe, the God who saves. And I pray today that your will would be done, that your wisdom would dictate, that you would reveal yourself as the great unifier, the great savior, the one on whom we depend. We turn over today to you and ask your guidance. In the name of Jesus, amen.
I recognize Senator Cowth for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Colleagues, please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 80th day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
Mr. President, on page 150, line 31, replace Albright with M. Kavanaugh. That's all I have this time.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Bills presented to the governor, LBs 815E and 816E, were presented May 18, 2023 at 8:24. And additionally, new LR 208, LR 208 from Senator Doran, that'll be referred to the executive board. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Breezy, you're recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that the deadline for introducing interim study resolutions is the 80th legislative day, which is today, no later than noon today. Standing committees may also introduce one additional interim study resolution prior to adjournment sine die. If your office has not yet received a three-part for an interim study, or if you have not yet requested a three-part for an interim study that you would like to introduce, please contact the Reviser of Statutes office. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Speaker Arch, you're recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. After today, we will have 10 days remaining in the session. With the passage of the budget bills today, all bills ready to be read on final reading may be read, including bills with a general fund impact. LB 574 will be up for its second round final reading tomorrow at 2 p.m. and we will be working through the noon hour tomorrow. Next week is a Monday through Thursday work week, with the first 3 days being late nights. On Monday, we will take up LB 50, the Judiciary Committee Priority Bill, which addresses justice reform. We have a 2-day weekend in front of us. Please enjoy it when it arrives. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Clerk, for first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, final reading, Legislative Bill 814E.
Senators, please find your seat. We are on final reading.
Mr. President, final reading, Legislative Bill 814E. First of all, Mr. President, we've got a recommit. Senator Clements would move to recommit LB 814 to the Appropriations Committee.
Senator Clements, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. This motion is, I'm using it so I can do an opening on the bill today, but I definitely don't want to have this bill coming back to the Appropriations Committee. We've worked 4.5 months on it. But I just wanted to let the body know about the process. We start with a big notebook like this, and all the agencies send the governor their budget requests, and then the fiscal office puts all those requests into a binder, and we start going through them in January and into February. Then we've made our recommendations as to what we think each agency should have. Then the agencies come back and we go through the book again with those agencies that had requests for more items. And then we start on the bills. We had 87 bills in appropriations, and we had our last hearing for those March 24th. So January, February, and March was pretty much every day in hearings, in meetings, in hearings. And I want to thank the director of the Legislative Fiscal Office, Keisha Patent, and their excellent help from all the other fiscal analysts providing the necessary information needed for the committee to make informed decisions on the budget proposal. And for the committee, I appreciate your late nights and your hard work helping the committee get this budget put together. This is the mainline budget. LB 814 is mainly the general fund appropriations bill for the coming 2 years, starting July 1, 2023, ending June 30th of 2025. And it will become operative on July 1 of 2023 with the E-clause. This also, we combined the capital construction bill that was LB 817. We put it in with LB 814 on general file. And you all have received the green budget book, and the budget book now has some adjustments. The main thing from LB 814 is now the daily green sheet that you receive. And going down a little bit of the green sheet today, line 8 starts with the forecasting board projected revenues. It's called net receipts. And we talked about how the forecasting board lowered this fiscal year $80 million, but they increased fiscal year 24 and 25 back up $80 million. So you'll see $6.5 billion in year 24, $6.6 billion fiscal year 25. Then if you look at, that's what we call our budgeting cap income that we budget to the forecasting board. Then we've taken money out of the general fund, a lot of it on the 814. If you look on line 9, says general fund transfers out. The second column, 1.399 billion. 1 billion of that is the education future fund for the school funding bill. And the third column, 699 million, 250 million of that is also education future fund. And another part of that transfer out would be transferred to the cash reserve that we transferred from general funds to cash reserve funds. Down on line 16 says LB 814 mainline budget bill. And the second column second and third columns are the spending in this bill, 5.31 billion in fiscal year 24, 5.327 billion in fiscal year 25. And let's see here. Then we go down to line 31. Says variance from minimum reserve. That's, you'll see $891 million there. That is the number that we talk about being to the floor. That's a bigger number than I've ever seen in my 7th year here. But then you'll find that there are places to spend that $891 million. We'll get to that in a minute. Then on line 34, 2-year average growth in spending shows 2.2%. the governor had wanted about 1.5% increase. We were pretty frugal, but I think 2.2% increase is still doing well, and that's with controlling spending. That's why there's that much money left to the floor for other uses, and we'll get to those. And so then the other thing is the last two columns are called the out years, fiscal years 26 and 27. And if all the projections go as projected, we're projecting 3% increase in revenues, 2% increase in spending. And with that's not forecasting board, that's just our estimate of increases. And that would leave $2.1 billion if nothing changes from what bills are involved right now. But and then at the bottom of the green sheet is the cash reserve fund. If you look at column 3, the end of the biennium, projected ending balance $780 million. The backside of the green sheet then is all the bills that we have not yet passed, and some on final reading, some on select file. The first fiscal year, 21.6 on final reading, we have 21.6 plus 64.8, $85 million, and then on select file, 90.9 in the first year, 545,000 the second year, and that's spending that we're going to have to decide how much of those are going to be approved. Then the lower section is not spending, but is changes in revenues if tax bills pass, tax relief bills. And if you look under final reading, revenue bill, final reading total, the second column, $94.9 million reduction in revenue, and the third column, $503.7 million reduction in revenue. And then on select file, there'll be 531 and 727, and it would be an additional 35 million the first year and 52 million the second year. So those are the numbers, if you added all those up, that use up all of the $891 million to the floor. And I believe that
1 minute.
Thank you. The governor is wanting to have well more than that to carry forward to the next year to keep especially our tax relief bills sustainable. So within here, the University of Nebraska does have a 2.5% increase in their funding. The Education Future Fund is funded, and I think I'll leave it at that, and just wanted to again thank my committee and thank the fiscal office for all their help in getting us to this point, and I would appreciate your green vote, and I would withdraw my motion.
It's withdrawn. Thank you, Senator Clemens. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to return LB 814 to select file for a specific amendment, that being AM 1740.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So I'm just sitting here doing math, one of my favorite pastimes. A while ago, I made a little day by day how many hours are left. If we go the maximum amount of hours, that would be I gave us a 15-minute window, 11:45 every day. After today, we would have 101 hours and 15 minutes. We have 15 bills that have a priority on final. So that right there is 30 hours. And at least on the agenda right now, we have 8 A bills. So that's a minimum of 4 hours. So we're talking 34 hours. Of that 100, 101.25. So it leaves us with 67.25 hours to accomplish anything that isn't currently on final. Assuming I don't get creative. And I think we all know that I'm pretty creative. And one of my favorite pastimes is finding ways to take time outside of the time. And I was given an enormous gift by this body, by the speaker and by the president on Tuesday of this week. I was taught how to take hours of time outside of the clock. So, again, start your lobbying. LB 574, it's getting its day to shine numerous times in the sun. Has your priority? Or is that your priority? Maybe everybody is totally cool with the turd sandwich that has become LB 574 getting a 4th time at prime time. Maybe you all are just can't wait for those criminal penalties to take effect on Saturday for medical professionals because it's got an E-clause. Thank God. I would hate to think that we aren't incarcerating our physicians soon enough. Whew. I mean, there was a concern that we might wait until next week to start incarcerating doctors for giving health care. Ladies, birthing folk, go get tested right now. Find out if you're pregnant. I don't care if you've missed your period or not. Get tested. I don't care if you're perimenopausal. Get tested. And find out if you are pregnant, are you going to die from that pregnancy? And get it taken care of between now and tomorrow afternoon because you are effed. Royally. Royally. Because as soon as tomorrow comes, if you are pregnant, you've got maybe a handful of weeks to get the medical care that you need if you are pregnant right now. Maybe, tops. Or if you are 9 weeks pregnant right now, and you find out that you have an ectopic pregnancy or that your baby's brain is floating outside of its body and you're going to be forced to carry that baby to term if you don't get that resolved by tomorrow afternoon. So please start calling your doctor's offices right now. And doctors, get everyone in the office standing by to make appointments. Please keep your offices open late. We are in a crisis. We are in a crisis, Nebraska. Call your doctors. Go to your pharmacy. Get a test. Do it right now. Don't wait. Don't wait till I'm done talking. Go right now. Every minute is precious to saving lives in this state. 67.25 hours remain. And your Nebraska legislature has made it crystal clear that discrimination is their priority. Members of this body have stood up here and whined, yes, whined about being called anti-gay. You are. You are anti-gay, you are transphobic, you are homophobic. You vote for LB 574, that's what you are. You're homophobic, you're transphobic. You're LGBTQ phobic. You're phobic, phobic, phobic. You vote for LB 574 and you open up the possibility for undoing decades of progress in civil rights. You open up the possibility for people to come for your marriages. But you're transphobic and homophobic enough that that's fine. It's fine because people stood in these chambers and chambers across the country and fought for your right to be married to who you're married to so that your children could exist. But you are too weak to stand up for other people's children. Your life is built on the shoulders of other people's work and advocacy for civil rights, and you are too weak to stand up for other people. When others did it for you, you won't do it for others. That is pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. I started out this morning before the speaker's announcement, and because of the reaction to comments I made about funding around parochial schools, I thought, why don't we revisit this delightful topic? Let's revisit the topic of the Omaha Archdiocese attempts to enact massive discriminatory policies against the LGBTQ community last fall. And the outcry of it all led them to walk it back and do something much less drastic, but still horrible. Maybe the Nebraska Legislature should take a cue from the Omaha Archdiocese. If you want to be horrible, do it incrementally. Be incremental in your terribleness. Be incremental in your bigotry. Be incremental in your phobia. Let's take a note from them, because they still haven't enacted a horrible transphobic policy. But at least they didn't do it in the first round. They realized, oh my goodness, people really hate this. Guess what? Yeah, we do. You know why? Because we love gay people. We love trans people. We love LGBTQAI plus people. Why? Because they are us. They are our family. They are our friends. They are us. And they deserve life and dignity. So yeah, when the Catholic Church in Omaha tried to enact hugely discriminatory policies against children and their families, people got pissed. Just like the people out there and the people up there are pissed. Get pissed. I had some people this morning ask me, what could they possibly do? And I said, I don't know anymore. I don't know. Do anything, do everything. If you have a paid lobbyist, call your paid lobbyist, because if there are criminal penalties against your profession, your paid lobbyist isn't worth poop. They're not worth it. Fire them. If you get criminal penalties in this session, fire your lobbyist, because they clearly did not do their job. Criminal penalties against a well-established, respected profession. Yeah, I would fire them for sure. I would fire them. We have 2 hospital administrators in here who are voting for this. Fire your lobbyists if they can't convince hospital administrators to not enact criminal penalties against doctors, because that is the ultimate in bananas. I can't even imagine a hospital administrator right now, somebody who's working in a hospital, being like, oh, you know what? I'm totally cool with you all having criminal penalties against you. That's not going to make my job harder. Not at all. It's going to be a fun day. I'm out of recipes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Moser would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Dan Rosenquist of Columbus. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise because today we have 2 budget bills that deal with the construction of the new prison. And I just want the body to be aware of that. Once you vote to support LB 814 and the next, I think it's LB 818, you're voting for one of the largest construction projects in our state's history. You're voting to not replace the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Because remember, 2 weeks ago, it was said to us that, the state would like to keep its options open and they don't want to close the prison. So you're not replacing the Nebraska State Penitentiary. You're going to vote to build a new prison that if we don't pass LB 50 forward next week, it is going to be overcrowded day one. And that means you will potentially have to build another prison, which is going to be close to within the next 10 years if you vote to support this. And then if we don't do no policy changes and we have to, well, I probably wouldn't be here, but yeah, definitely, I don't think I'll be here. But you'll also have to vote to build another prison, which would mean in really less than a decade, you'll be spending $1 billion on prisons to house people, when we could find alternative ways to address our criminal justice system in a more efficient and fiscally responsible manner, invest in communities, and those type of things. So I just wanted to put on everybody's mind that you're going to vote to build a new prison, not a replacement prison. The Nebraska State Penitentiary is not closing. It is staying open. You're not replacing it. Contrary to comments made over a 2 to 3 year period, that's not happening. Nebraska State Penitentiary is staying open. You're going to vote to build another prison. And if we don't move LB 50 forward next week, it is for sure going to be overcrowded, which means you're going to have to add on an addition to that, which means you're going to be voting to build another prison in less than 10 years, which means that'll be close to $1 billion spent on prisons, just the construction. We're not even talking about operational costs and staffing costs and programmatic costs and any of those things. So just be aware, you're voting to build a new prison, not a replacement prison. The Nebraska State Penitentiary is not closing. Just remember that. Next week, when LB 50 comes up and we're talking about policy changes needed to cut down the potential forecast of the prisons being overcrowded and the need for policy changes to address that issue. That's all I wanted to say, just to let you know, once you vote this forward, you're building a new prison, not a replacement prison, and we still need policy changes to address our criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. We definitely, Senator McKinney, are going to need to build a new prison because we're going to be incarcerating all of our medical professionals, unless they leave the state, of course. So I don't know, maybe LB 574 has completely shifted my thinking on this. Will the doctors work for $1.35 a day, $1.38, whatever it is? Do they get a higher pay? Oh wait, they won't have a license. Right. That's what comes with the criminal penalties. You lose your license. I see Senator Reapy is over there talking to a doctor who he's going to vote to have criminal penalties for his profession. And the I don't know what mentality of this body where you all are inflicting trauma on people and then you come and talk to us like we're friends. It's very mentally unhealthy. And it's not cool. It's not cool. It's also not cool to check out during final reading and go get intoxicated and then come back and be a joke on the floor of the Nebraska Legislature. That also is not cool. And before anybody in the media starts asking me, just look at who's checked out for hours at a time on final reading, and you can figure that list out yourself. I mean, it happens every night during late nights where people leave and go get drunk. But during final reading, they have to actually check out. If you're gonna go get drunk, just leave. We don't need you here. You're not a serious person. Just leave. Actually, that's not true. We do need you here because we have to have 33 people to vote for LB 814 because it's a budget bill. And the bill's yesterday. But people couldn't be bothered to remain sober for it. This place has descended into utter chaos. And yes, I know the recipe for chaos. And yes, I am a masterful chef. But apparently, a whole bunch of you do too. Your chaos just looks more messy and less purposeful. I have chaos for a purpose. I don't know what chaos getting drunk in the middle of final reading is, except for just wildly inappropriate and disrespectful to the people in this chamber and the people of this state. But thank goodness we're thanking the staff for being here while members of the body are getting drunk. Why? Why is she talking about this? Why not? Why would I keep your secrets? Why would I protect you? You don't deserve my protection. You don't deserve my silence on your poor behavior. I saw that the HR manual was voted on or whatever by the executive board. I haven't had a chance to read over it. I'm curious, what are the steps for sexual assault and harassment in the workplace by senators to staff? Or senators to senators? Yesterday, Senator Wayne was talking about knowing when you have to keep quiet because of the power dynamic, basically, and I know that all too well. I have been in this chamber. I have been physically touched and restrained by members of the legislature, and I kept my mouth shut because they were in positions of power, and I didn't want my stuff to get messed up. Now, obviously, that didn't happen this year because I don't care anymore. I learned to use my voice. I learned to stand up for myself, and it is hard. But I would never let a male senator touch me again the way that they did my first year and my second year.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do want to talk about the budget we have before us. But in light of the announcement of LB 574 coming up tomorrow, I agree with Senator Kavanaugh in the sense that when people ask me what can be done, it feels like everyone has made up their minds. But I do encourage those of you who are listening in and share the significant concerns that I have with this legislation that we'll be debating tomorrow for the final time, to please reach out to your elected officials and talk to us. It does matter. Your emails, your phone calls, they do matter. We listen. And so please, if you're listening, take that moment to reach out, and perhaps it will change a person's mind. When this is my last biennial budget, and I will leave my comments where I started them as we started this budget process. It's been an absolute honor to serve on the Appropriations Committee for over 6 years now, and I want to thank the entire committee and Chairman Clements for his work and leadership. I knew pretty early on as a freshman senator with budgets that there are parts of the budget that you absolutely champion and love, and there are parts of the budget that you end up having concerns with, but recognize that we're 49 unique individuals representing an incredibly diverse set of districts and constituencies across the state, and we have different needs. And so the reality is that you get some of the things you'd like to see, and others have the investments that they'd like to see. And that is the process of creating a budget. So today I want to talk about some of the items before us, and I'm merging LB 814 in the following piece of legislation and talking more holistically about what we've done. First and foremost, from the time that I have started on the budget process, I have prioritized provider rates. This is funding that goes out to support organizations and individuals that do the most incredible work to support some of our most vulnerable community members. That's child welfare agencies, that's people who support people with disabilities and behavioral health issues and mental health issues and senior citizens. And I'm proud of our appropriations committee from voting and pushing to increase provider rates this year. Is it the increase in size that I would have liked to see? No, I would consider it a modest increase. But it is an increase, and it is an area that we have prioritized in this budget this year. Secondly, when I was asked by the media in January what we were going to fund this year, I said this was going to be the year of, I anticipated it would be the year of water, and it has been. We are making significant investments in water across the state. Most notably, as a Lincoln senator, we're putting close to $180 million of ARPA funds into supporting Lincoln and the Southeast Nebraska's ability to build a second water source, which needs to be completed by 2048 in order for us to meet the growing needs of our city.
1 minute.
This is a big deal for us. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other projects that we're working on, in particular with the canal on my next time.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise in rebuttal of several remarks that have already been stated this morning. First of all, the legislature, for those watching at home, those of us here know, we are not in utter chaos. This legislature has accomplished many, many things, good things. We're not in utter chaos. Everything's going to be fine. Just out of nowhere, there's a claim that people were drunk last night. I have talked to people. Nobody seems to know what that's even about. I did check out early last night. It might have been the second time this legislature that I have done so. I was very tired. My grandson graduated from kindergarten yesterday, and I didn't even know about it until I got home last night, had watched it on a video. Senator Aguilar has been coming here every day when his family, I'm sure, thinks he should be home, because he's dedicated to the legislature and getting things done for Nebraska. Senator Albright, who is here giving culture to a bill that she doesn't like, but she's willing to compromise to get something done. And this talk that 12 weeks is somehow just horrible, are we kidding ourselves? 12 weeks is when parents have gender parties, when they start looking at names. I've got a daughter who's pregnant, not the daughter, I have 3 daughters actually, not the daughter that some of your, I don't know who they are, write ugly letters about, not that daughter. Besides, that daughter is not, she didn't even agree with me on these issues, so she agrees on some. Anyway, I've got another daughter who's pregnant, and every week I get a picture of a baby. And Senator Brewer, he shouldn't be here. He's been sick, I don't know, for a month, 6 weeks. I'm not going to, at this turn of the mic, ask Senator Kavanaugh questions, but I will the next time. I'm sick and tired of the Catholic Church getting beat up, especially by Catholics. Nobody forces you to be Catholic or go to a parochial school or to be Lutheran. We are a country that was founded on freedom of religion. And everybody gets up and talks about freedom of speech, but we are allowed freedom of religion in this country. And not just, we're not, and everybody only reads the first part of the First Amendment where it says there will be no state religion. That is true, and there shouldn't be. There were centuries of wars over religions in what countries? And America was founded to avoid that. But it also says we all have the right, and there should be no law that keeps us from practicing the religion we want to practice.
1 minute.
This legislature, when we're done, and we will get done, and Senator Aguilar and Senator Brewer and Senator Albright will stick with us, and we'll get to the end, and it will be transformational. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 243 as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Legislative Bill 535, your Committee on Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs reports Legislative Bill 535.
Senator Slama, what's your point of order?
I am stating that LB 535 was advanced by the Government Committee in violation of Rule 3, Section 16, in that an unauthorized person was permitted to attend and participate in the executive session in which the bill was advanced.
Senator Slama, could you approach Senator Brewer as well and Speaker Arch? Senator Slama, Mr. Clerk, it's my understanding that this bill will not be read over at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President. Legislative Bill 534 will not be read across. 535, excuse me.
And Senator Slama, back to your point of order.
Yes, I intend to withdraw my point of order given the fact that LB 535 has been rightfully retracted. But I objected to this under the knowledge that a high-ranking member of the executive branch was present, answering questions and actively participating in the government committee's executive session yesterday on my bill, LB 535. And I objected for the sake of preventing a precedent in which a member of the executive branch, be it the governor, the deputy secretary of state of elections, or anyone else in another branch of government could come into an executive session of a committee hearing and be providing information, misinformation, orders, or otherwise to our legislative branch when we're doing our business. It's my understanding the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee will be having an executive session later today without the presence of the Deputy Secretary of State of Elections, and that satisfies me, and I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Senator Slama. It's withdrawn. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, what is your point of order?
Point of inquiry, actually, but I would like to know if the clock stopped during this point of order discussion, and if so, for how long?
Mr. Clerk.
Senator Kavanaugh, because we were in the middle of reading items, it's generally an administrative process. We did not stop the clock for this discussion. Mr. President, continuing with items, LR 209 from Senator McKinney. That will be referred to the Executive Board. LR 210 from Senator McKinney. That will be referred to the Executive Board. LR 211 from Senator Ballard. 212 from Senator Holleran. Those will both be referred to the Executive Board as well. Amendment to LB 514 from Senator Brewer. Amendment to be printed. Motions to be printed from Senator Slama. All to LB 514. Senator Slama, amendment to be printed to LB 535. Series of amendments to be printed to LB 535. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to the queue, Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I do rise today with questions mostly about LB 814. So I know we're talking about the budget again, and I think that Senator McKinney set us off on a pretty good path outlining a number of the concerns, the frustrations, and I think the questions that a lot of us have with regards to some of the things that are contained in this budget. As Senator Wishart indicated, obviously there's rarely going to be a budget that is perfect, and I understand that oftentimes we have to put things through that aren't entirely perfect. We don't want the perfect get in the way of the good. I know people say that oftentimes, but that doesn't mean that we have to wholeheartedly support or just kind of close our eyes and move forward with things that do have problematic procedures. With regard to the building of the new prison, that is something that I do have a lot of questions and concerns about. What we know is that here in Nebraska, we have a prison overcrowding problem. That's something that I think we can all agree upon. And it's not a partisan issue. It's not opinion. It's fact. We know that Nebraska has, I think, one of the most overcrowded prison systems right now in the country. And I think that if you look at the statistics for a short period of time, we have the most acute prison overcrowding problem in the entire country. And so, yes, I understand when people look at that, they sometimes say, well, doesn't that mean we have to build a new facility? The problem that I have with that is when you create the conditions within which a problem then presents itself, and then you act as though your hands are tied and it's inevitable that you then have to do something to fix that problem, like build a new prison, it ignores how we got here in the first place. I was not a part of the conversations previously that have happened in this body with regards to a new prison, but it is my understanding from talking to a number of people that the costs that are associated with keeping up the Nebraska State Penitentiary, NSP, would have been less than building a new prison. And in my conversations with Senator McKinney, who has followed up on this topic extensively, it sounds as though there were repairs and maintenance costs and things that had to be done for NSP that simply weren't done for a number of years, and that ultimately there was still money in the coffers for NSP to be kept up and fixed. And instead of utilizing that, that was not done. And now we find ourselves in a situation where NSP does have some pretty bad conditions for incarcerated folks. And I do think we have a responsibility to the people of Nebraska and to our incarcerated people to make sure those conditions are livable. But I think it would be more fiscally responsible and financially responsible of us to invest in keeping up what we currently have, rather than simply building a new prison and inviting more usage of those beds while simultaneously not agreeing to close down NSP, which currently exists. What we know is that nearly half of the inmates in prison are within 3 years of release. So we know that nearly half of the people that are in prison are going to be released relatively soon, but there's not proper programming or staffing for them that to allow them to be released back into the population in a way that makes the community safer or benefits them. We know the prison population as of the 2022 master plan from DCS was 5,517 people. The projected prison population in 2025 was 6,445 people, and the prison population projected in 2030 was 7,327 people. That is exponential growth between now and 2030 if we don't do anything. We also know that in the last decade, Nebraska's prison population has increased by 21%. That's 3 times the increase in our state's population. So we're seeing a disproportionate increase in the prison population as opposed to the actual growth of people in Nebraska. We also know that in the last decade, recidivism has not decreased. 30% of prison inmates return to prison. And that 30% is low, thank you, Mr. President, as it doesn't capture former prison inmates who reoffended but don't go back to prison. So if we do nothing on criminal justice reform, our prison population is going to increase by 25%. And the reason I say that is I think it's important when we're having this conversation here today to ensure that it's a holistic conversation, that we don't act as though building a new prison is an inevitability. It's not. We have the power to control that. And I think we need to be good stewards of our money. And I think we need to be good stewards of our financial resources in such a way that we're doing a benefit to both incarcerated people and the people of Nebraska. There's a number of things in this budget I think that a lot of folks have questions about. I hope that we continue to have a conversation about it today. But I do think we need to focus very carefully on these individual big ticket items and make sure that we're being fiscally responsible with the dollars for Nebraskans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 814, and I really want to thank Chairman Clements and members of the Appropriations Committee for their hard work on the budget this year. And I do want to speak about a couple of issues. First of all, I want to speak briefly about an issue that's on the minds of many members, and that is legislative staff pay. Like many of you, I believe the legislature needs to increase staff salaries in order to be more competitive and help recruit and retain good legislative staff. And I support the increase in staff salaries represented in LB 814, and I thank the committee for doing that. I believe this represents a good start, but I think we need to do more here. We need to see how our salaries compare with those offered in the private sector. The legislature's current staff classification and pay plan is based on a study conducted for the legislature by the National Conference of State Legislatures in 2001, more than 20 years ago. And the executive board has been engaged in discussions with NCSL about conducting a new pay study. And I appreciate the Appropriations Committee including this item in the budget as well. Even with the salary increases included in the budget, I think the time is right for us to look how our current salaries compare and the job descriptions compare in today's market. And I also want to speak about another area in the budget. And I at this time, I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for including in the budget an appropriation of $2.5 million for an efficiency review of state government. And that's found on page 116 and 117 in the budget and is based on LB 684. I introduced LB 684 to require the Department of Administrative Services to contract for an efficiency review of all state agencies in an effort to reduce costs while improving quality. In other words, to ensure that state programs and services are providing our taxpayers with the most bang for their buck, to ensure that state operations are conducted in the most efficient manner possible. And I really want to thank Senator Armendariz for prioritizing this bill. And I would note that other states have done similar reviews, and the return on investment really has been off the charts. You know, for example, Wyoming did a similar review. They spent $2 million, and the review identified $200 to $250 million in biannual savings. Kansas did it in 2015 at a cost of about $3 million. They identified potential savings over $2 billion, and their 2017 budget assumed savings of $47 million flowing from the ideas found in the study and nearly $90 million in 2019. And I can give other examples, but someone in the industry has suggested the identified savings from such an audit will generally average about 4 to 6% of a state's budget. And for Nebraska, that could be in the $250 to $350 million range. And I have copies of several of these efficiencies reviews done for several other states in my office, and they're generally 150 to 200 page documents, and feel free to stop by and take a look at one sometime if you'd like. And again, these reviews lay out suggestions that may or may not be adopted by the executive branch or us, the legislature. This provision really is not about reducing or eliminating government services. It's simply trying to ensure that we're operating in the most efficient way possible. It's about being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and doing everything possible to ensure that government programs are run in the most efficient, responsible way possible with as little waste, duplication of cost, or untapped potential as possible. It's about being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and we really have a solemn obligation to do our best in that regard.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And reviews like this can help us meet that responsibility. I really believe that provision is about good governance. And I really want to thank Senator Armendariz for prioritizing this idea, and Chairman Clements and the rest of the committee for seeing this through. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Bosden, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I do rise for a couple of reasons, one of which is to support LB 814 and the work that Senator Clements and his team did on the budget bills. I also think it's important, because people do watch these proceedings, to know what is fact and what is absolute disinformation. To stand and to continue saying that there are criminal penalties in LB 574, its amendment, or any format of it, is a lie. It is not a criminal penalty bill. Having gone to law school, having practiced criminal law, and also being fortunate enough to know how to read, I have gone through this amendment several times. I've also stood here and said this. This will be my third time. Maybe it will be the charm. On page 5, line 22, it discusses an administrative penalty. That's a disciplinary measure, meaning if you fail to pay an administrative penalty, you could be subject to discipline. Not a crime. Also on page 9, line 10, it says civil penalty. This section allows the director to dismiss the action or impose a civil penalty. Also not a crime. Can't go to jail for that. The word criminal appears one time in this amendment. It is on page 6, line 26. It refers to a criminal abortion. This is an example of unprofessional conduct that does include criminal abortions. It is not a criminal penalty. It is not new language to the statute, and it is not new language in this amendment or the bill. For someone to stand here and encourage panic porn with these medical providers, nursing staff, and hospitals with no obligation for their accountability on this disinformation is pathetic. When we talk, and to follow up on that, if you look at the Nebraska revised statutes, which I'd encourage everyone to do, chapter 28, section 104 does describe what a criminal penalty includes. It's the imposition of a fine, imprisonment, or death. And that is following a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. You will not hear any of that language, see any of that language, or know what that refers to when you look at this amendment, because it's not in there. Stop saying otherwise. And I also want to address the fact that a number of us who checked out, myself included yesterday, were getting intoxicated and just the absurdity of that. Several of the people in this body are post-surgery, they're getting medical treatment, or like myself, they're putting their children to bed. So I think that that was inappropriate and offensive. And for someone to tell us things we shouldn't be doing on final reading, like checking out, perhaps that's because we're spending final reading talking about recipes, commas, and spewing false information to incite panic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Boson. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is a hard act to follow. Senator Boson said it better than anyone that has spoken about what the issues really are. She described it correctly. But when you speak on the floor of the legislature, if the truth isn't on your side, then you pound on something else, and hysteria and fear or whatever else that you can think of, you try to use. And so we should be talking about LB 814. And many of you have said the Appropriations Committee should be recognized for all their hard work. It was our job, okay? And one day I was whining about going to Appropriations for the 4th time. And my roommate, Senator Holleran, said, remember, you signed up for this. I never spoke to him about that again. I signed up for it. We, the Appropriations Committee, signed up for it. So whatever time it took, whatever effort we put in to get LB 814 and the other budget bills here was our job. And I do appreciate the fact that you recognized that we did do our job and we got it in a form that you can understand. But I do want to recognize one member of the Appropriations Committee, and that is our chairman. Chairman Clements went above and beyond the duty of a chairman to understand each one of the requests from all the agencies, each one of the bills. He researched those. He had the information to answer the questions that we asked. He led us in a way that was open and transparent, like nothing I have ever experienced before from a chairman. So if you want to give kudos to somebody, Senator Clements is the one. So we'll continue to talk about hysteria of all the people are going to die from passing 574 and the 12-week abortion limit, which is not true. And Senator Boson described that as well as anybody I've ever heard say it. So don't get up on the mic your next time up and tell all the people in Nebraska that if you're pregnant, make sure you get a test soon because you won't get health care. That's not a true statement. Let's move on to talk about what's on the board, 814. Remove the return to select, and let's make a decision that's best for all the Nebraskans that sent us here to do the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Mosier has some guests in the north balcony, 50 fourth graders from Emerson Elementary in Columbus. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Raybould, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, fellow Nebraskans watching us debate lots of issues this morning. I just want to address Senator Erdman's comments and Senator Boson's concerns. There is a real cause for concern among our physicians, in particular our OBGYNs, our neonatologists, our psychiatrists on dealing with LB 574 and the mashup version that includes LB 626. I want to direct my colleagues' attention to the actual bill itself, and I shall read it for you if you're listening. On page 9, line 1, it says, if the director determines upon completion of a hearing under section 38-183 or 38186 that the licensee has performed or induced an unlawful abortion in violation of Section 4 of this act, the director shall enter an order imposing a sanction authorized under subsection 2 of the section 38-196, a sanction. If you go further down on that very same page, on page 9, line 20, it starts out, if the director finds such a violation, the director shall enter an order revoking the licensee's credential to practice pursuant to the Uniform Credentials Act in the state of Nebraska in accordance with subsection 2 of the section 38-196 and section 38-1.100. Revocation of your license, revocation of your medical license to practice at that institution. That is what has caused an uproar among our physicians, and rightly so. Many of these physicians would be losing their license and their livelihood for a profession that they have spent an extraordinary number of years and incurring an extraordinary amount of debt to care for their patients in the generally recognized practices of appropriate patient health care. But not only does it say it in that section, it talks about sanctions, it talks about revocations, but keep going down on page 10. I can tell you, from having negotiated contracts a good chunk of my life, whenever in a body of a lease or a contract, they repeat a directive twice. They do it so that there is no ambiguity. They do it for full and clear clarity on the subject matter. That the only course of action, and I said this before, Plan A, revocation. Plan B, revocation. Plan C, revocation. That directly impacts the livelihood of our credentialed physicians. On page 10, it gives you a bunch of procedures that you go through, but on page 10, line 6, it reinforces the only action that a director may take is that revocation. Upon completion of any hearing regarding discipline of a credential for performing or inducing an unlawful abortion in violation of Section 4 of this Act, if the director determines that such violation occurred, the director shall impose a sanction of revocation in accordance with Section 38-1.100. So again,
1 minute.
thank you, Mr. President. In the very first section on page 9, it talks about sanctions. And then in 2 other components of this piece of bill, it talks about what is that sanction. The sanction that they're saying is revocation. Revocation. And for full clarity, I am not an attorney, but I have read more contracts and law than I think a lot of attorneys in this room. When you have that clear language and direction, that is what it means. The clear language that's what it means. For all of our physicians, they are not fear-mongering. I don't know. I have gotten hundreds of emails from physicians who are also very good readers, and they interpret it exactly the same way I have. A revocation of your license is taking away your ability and your livelihood. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your last time before your close.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Just to clarify, I did not say who was intoxicated last night. I said that individuals who were checked out and came back were intoxicated. There's that old saying, I'm just a hat maker. If the hat fits, that's on you, not me. That is not to imply at all that Senator Bosden or Senator Linehan were intoxicated. I have no idea. I was not speaking about them at all. But there were people who were very clearly intoxicated on the floor last night, both by their attitude, demeanor, and smell. So I don't know what you want me to do with that information other than I can talk about whatever I want to talk about. I'm making an observation. I observed it. I think it's not appropriate. You don't have to care at all what I think. You really, truly don't. It is really what I say and think should be so much less relevant to all of you. You all keep getting up and commenting on things that I say like they have some sort of sway over you. And the only thing I can think is that, no, you clearly don't care what I think. You don't care about my views. You don't care what I think. That is very, very clear. But Nebraska does. Nebraska cares what I think, and Nebraska cares about what I am talking about, and Nebraska cares about what I am saying. So when I say things that do not shine a favorable light on people in this body, you must stand up to rebuke it, because you might not take me seriously, but Nebraska does take me seriously. And every time you get up and rebuttal me, it just shows me how true that statement is. So I get it, but there were definitely people who were intoxicated on the floor last night. And I never said who they were. I just said that they checked out, because you had to check out to leave the floor. People check out for all kinds of reasons. And even the people who were intoxicated, maybe they didn't check out to go and drink. That just happened to happen at the same time. Also, when people talk about the fact that they're drinking when they're not in here, that's another indicator that they're drinking. So if you want to get mad at me for talking about people drinking, that's fine, because you don't think it's an appropriate dirty laundry to air. Okay, but to insinuate that I'm lying, that's not the case. People smell and reek of alcohol. They're walking around here tipsy as can be, and they're talking about drinking. That's the reality. So do whatever you want with that. It's neither here nor there for me. But I do think that when you're making a big stand about how you're thanking the staff for being here late, it's very disingenuous when people are down in their offices getting drunk. But I myself, I enjoy a cocktail. I enjoy wine. I even enjoy beer. And I last night really just wanted a glass of, like a cold, crisp glass of rosé. Instead, I had a lovely glass of ice water, but that was my choice. I own that. I could have checked out and gone and gotten a glass of rosé. I just didn't. So.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, I can be whatever religion I want. And I don't have to let an institution tell me anything. And I can talk about any religion I want. I can have my opinions. I can have my critiques. I can have my observations. That's my prerogative. If I don't like what my own religion is doing to trans kids and LGBTQ kids, I can talk about that, both inside the church, free will, and inside the legislature, freedom of speech. And I will, because I don't. And I think that what the Catholic Church in Omaha, Nebraska is doing is horrible. And I'm going to talk about it because I think it's horrible. And
That's
because
your time,
I don't want it to
Senator.
happen anymore.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for the guy clapping for me out there. I appreciate that. Never get standing ovation before I even start talking. I'd like to clarify on a comment that Senator Kavanaugh said, if she would yield to a question, please.
Senator Kavanaugh, would you yield to a question?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, that sums it up right there. I had a lot of grave concern about a comment that she said earlier when she said opponents should do anything and everything to stop this bill. She was pertaining to 574. I actually would like some clarification on what she meant by that. Does that mean, being in the rotunda like last time, which is fine? Does that, well, okay. So she will yield to a question. Will Senator Kavanaugh yield to a question, please?
Senator Kavanaugh, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
So can you clarify that comment for me, please?
Yes, I can. And I said no because I'm tired of you and Senator Linehan asking me ridiculous questions on the mic. This is actually a serious question. So I did not mean physical violence, anything within legal reason. So come and exercise your First Amendment right of free speech. Talk to your senators.
I figured that's what you meant. I just want to make sure I clarify that before we start getting texts and emails and stuff.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One of my other concerns is not so. I figured that's what she meant. She didn't mean to incite violence or any of that kind of stuff. I just want to make sure we clarify that on the mic for the record. What I do have some concern is how do opponents of 574 how they could interpret a comment like that. I know she doesn't mean it to mean something, but again, like I mentioned the other day, words have meaning. And so we want to make sure that we're precise with what we say, and we need to clarify things sometimes, because there are sometimes people can hear something like that who are adamant opponents of 574 and take it to not what Senator Kavanaugh means. And there is a difference between caring what you think and disagreeing with you. So we do care what you think, but we just disagree with what you say. Doesn't mean we don't care what you think. And a little concern that I had with Senator Raybould talking about license revocation, that is not the same as criminal penalty. I think what Senator Bosman was up standing and talking about was the criminal intent that Senator Kavanaugh was talking about with 574. I'm clarifying that in her mind. It had nothing to do with licensure. And so I just want to make sure we clarify what Senator Kavanaugh said on the microphone for the record. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to pick back up with the conversation regarding LB 814. And I had run out of time before I could talk about the canal. I think that Senator John Kavanaugh has expressed some important points about the canal. And I do think that this level of investment from the state needs to go through significant rigor, which is why, as an appropriations committee, we have set that money aside, colleagues. And we have not appropriated the entire amount of money for this canal. And I want to be very clear with that. That was a very intentional decision by the appropriations committee. Instead, we have moved enough money to be able to build a canal should the future legislature decide this is absolutely a must for our water security. And I am one of the senators that agrees that we should be doing everything as a body to make sure that our constituents have access to water, not only for drinking, but for our economy to thrive. But we have not appropriated the entire amount of money. Instead, we are allowing for a portion, approximately, I believe, $60 million annually, to be funded to the Department of Natural Resources for them to move forward on this project. There is plenty of time for this legislature, colleagues, to continue to scrutinize this effort and to bring legislation to address any of the concerns that they have. So I want to be very clear on that, because sometimes it gets caught up in the fact that we have set aside money as opposed to appropriating the entire amount. The other big infrastructure priority that we as a committee, and then hopefully this body, is going to move forward on is an investment in roads funding. So we are investing over $100 million in roads funding, and that funding is to be matched with a significant tranche of federal funds that are coming in due to the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill in 2021. There is more needs, as I believe my friend and colleague Senator Bosselman can express, for roads and bridges infrastructure across our state that can even be met with the amount that we're investing this year. But this is a good opportunity for us as a state to leverage one-time state funding to draw down additional federal funds so that we can improve our roads and bridges across the state. Finally, one of the areas that I am most proud of is the commitment that we are making in the budget through cash reserve funds and some general funds to the East Omaha Economic Recovery project that has been led by Senator McKinney, Senator Wayne, Senator Vargas, and Senator McDonnell. This, colleagues, for those of you who were not there last year, started as a vision last session that those 4 senators brought to us as a legislature regarding what we could do to invest in a historically underinvested area of the state, recognizing that these types of investments will help build wealth and assets for community members for generations to come. I can't express how transformational this funding opportunity will be, and I hope that, and I know Senator Wayne in particular has talked about this, that this becomes a model for how we strategically support economic development across the state, looking at what has worked and what doesn't work as these senators lead on this project. And I do want to do a shout out for Senator McKinney's bill. I hope some of you were able to attend the briefing this morning. That is coming up later this afternoon. That is part 2 to this investment that we are making, and I encourage all of you to support that, because again, we can be part of something really transformative in this state, and it's long past due. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Doran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Wishart, Senator Clements for some of the comments, Senator Erdman too about the budget. These are, I believe, the last 2 budget bills that we have today on final reading. And once we get through the budget bills on final reading, we had a little issue last night where then all of the bills that you see, I call it requests for funding, requests, or that will be part of the revenue packages that you see on the green sheet, then they will be started the process of, I call it, being counted on the green sheet. The fiscal office updates this every day. And if you noticed, as Senator Clemens said, we are still on general funds. We're at $891 million for this year yet. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed since these budget bills were brought to the floor. These will start moving once we start acting on either the bills on the back for appropriation bills or on the back when you look at the revenue part. Part of what we do in appropriations is and I always like to talk about this every year, is we like to look at, I call it a longer term view. Yes, we have last year's what we reappropriate or some funds that they need for last year's adjustments, but then we do the next 2-year budget. But much of our time also is spent on, I call it the 2 future years after that, 25 and 26, and even farther than that. And how does our state fiscally remain viable and strong out in those future years? When I came to appropriations 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, our rainy day fund was under 300 million. Technically on the books, they had it at 300 million, but it was under 300 million. I took some criticism for a vote I made on one thing in that budget, but I wanted to try to get it up to 350 million that first year. That was our goal. We ended up at 345 million. The next year we ended up at 458 million roughly. 2 years ago we ended up at 990 million, and then this year, if we wouldn't spend any funds and the revenue would all be there, we're at 2.3 billion. So that's what's happened to the rainy day fund. We ended last year, technically we were going to end at 1.245 billion rainy day fund, which, to put all these rainy day funds in context, the highest until 3 years ago, the highest we'd ever been was 775 million in the rainy day fund. And now we have, because of various reasons, we have just had tremendous amount of revenue, and we have gone on past that a ways. But to put that in long-term context again, when you look at, Senator Clemens mentioned this, when you look at the rainy day fund and what we will end up with at the end of the 2-year session is 780 million. In an overall longer-term picture, looking back 30 to 40 years, that is a tremendous number.
if you don't count the last 3 or 4 years. Where will that number be in the future? And it predicts here also the following 2 years out at $729 million and $679 million. Part of why I bring this up is I think as a body, we are doing a lot of major projects this year. We are, I call it, doing some things that long-term will have economic benefit for the state of Nebraska. But what we also need to be remembering as a body is
1 minute.
Long-term, thank you. Long-term, what does our fiscal shape looks like? Are we going to have the revenues? Will we hold expenditures down so that 4 years from now, and I made this comment last year, body, but they really need to go back and look at 3 or 4 years before, because many of these things we put in place. I am very, very much in support of the budget. I am very glad and thankful we have put together the budget we have this year. And with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Wishart announces a guest under the south balcony, Krista Eggers of Omaha, Gretna. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a short comment. I put on my light and rose to speak after hearing Senator Linehan speak on her last turn. I've never heard Senator Aguilar or Albright or Brewer or any other senator talk about their health issues this session, or if they have any health issues, or you know, I know everybody is struggling with something different, but Senator Linehan talking about missing her grandchild's graduation. I hate that for you. I'm so sorry. Seriously, I would hate to have that happen to me. And I'm happy you're listening, because I'm only asking you, we are only here doing this because of LB 574, period. I am not asking you to sit here through late nights to vote on these bills that we're dragging out. I'm asking you to love your family more than you hate mine. I'm asking you to love your family more than you hate mine. If your family wants you home to recover from surgery, maybe you should do that. If you want to go see your grandson graduate from preschool, you should do that. Instead, you are here to drag out this session because you won't come off this bill that hurts my son. You hate him more than you love your own family, and that's why you're here. And so, you know, go to the graduation. Go recover from your surgery. We don't need you here. We need you to vote no or present not voting on 574 because, you know, there's nothing else in this body that's affecting your family that way. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to be fairly brief here, but I'd like to just speak a little bit to the Perkins County Canal. I know Senator Wishart raised the issue of the Perkins County Canal. I can't begin to stress how vitally important that is, not only to Western Nebraska, but the entire state. The Perkins County Canal, many of us have had the opportunity to go on the tour. I've been on it twice. If you haven't been on it and you have questions, I strongly encourage you to do it. I know Senator Frederickson's been on it. I know that Senator John Kavanaugh's been on it. Many senators have been on this tour. And this is a game changer for Nebraska. We have an opportunity to once and for all claim the water that we're entitled to from the South Platte River. I want to make it clear that I'm looking at the original work that was done by the company it was contracted with to do this work. Highly world-renowned company. I know the research office has done their own review, and I'm not throwing the research office under the bus, but I have seen some fairly significant errors in the report that they've submitted. One of them, as an example, on page 1, uses the assumption that if we would get 500 CFS water flow in the canal, if it were built during the entire non-irrigated season, and then they go on from there and make their projections. Well, the canal is going to be 1,000 CFS capacity. And oh, by the way, it's because it's going to be dug deeper, so it's not going to take more land space, so there won't be an issue with being able to go to 1,000 CFS. That's what the dollar amount is there for. Right now, today, because of the rains that have occurred clear out west, there's 2,000 CFS flowing down the South Platte River. There are no dams along the South Platte River. It merges with the North Platte at North Platte. The North Platte River, of course, has McConaughey. There's no dam on the South Platte. That water that's flowing now is going to run out the back end of the state of Nebraska, and it's going to go unused. If that Perkins County Canal were in place today, we would be gathering 2,000 CFS, not 500, not even 1,000. Because the 500 is a minimum amount that we're due in the non-irrigated season. And anything above that, we get to capture as well if we have the infrastructure in place to capture it. This is critically important. Just ask Lincoln. They're trying to get drinking water here. Tell me how important water is. Tell me the value of that water to Colorado. What would Colorado be willing to pay for having some portion of that allocation back? It's critically important. Anybody that's reading the other study, I want you to read it with a jaded eye and understand the credentials of the two authors of the two different reports. With that, I know Senator Mosier would like some time. I'm willing to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Mosier.
Senator Mosier yielded 130.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was a comment made a few speakers back about dashing out to get an abortion before the abortion bill reaches the final vote. And the alarm and the tone of the delivery was political theater. I mean, we all care
1 minute
about our fellow senators, but that doesn't mean we agree with them. Looking at the Department of Health and Human Services report on abortion statistics, 90% of the abortions happen before week 12. 90%. And this isn't a number by some fly-by-night website. It's on the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services statistical report, page 10. Take a look at it. 90% of them happen before week 12. So this bill is not going to affect 90% of those abortions. And if the deadline moves forward, they have the option to consider an abortion before 12 weeks. So maybe there will be less than 10% of the abortions affected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moser and Senator Jacobson. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would rather ignore things that are said on the floor that are ridiculous. But I've read the paper for the last 2 days, and if we don't get up and push back on them, they end up as quotes in the paper, and then it becomes like that's what really happened. And I'm tired of reading the papers, and it's not the press's fault. Actually, 2 mornings ago, I called a reporter and complained, and then I realized when I read the story again, no, that is what happened. Nobody pushed back, so it's in the paper. So I didn't enjoy this. I'd rather be talking about the bill. Actually, I would rather do this the normal way. So for those of you who are watching this, what we usually do on bills that we get to final reading, we sit here. I remember times we'd come in on a last day of the week or a day like today, and there'd be 15, 20 final bill readings, and we'd read it, punch our lights, read it, punch our lights. We'd be done before noon. But we've decided that's not the way we're going to do it this year. I think I remember now that I was accused of asking ridiculous question yesterday. Ridiculous. Well, when you stand up on the floor and you make an announcement that someone who is a significant contributor is going to pull all their funding from all the parochial schools, and that will show you it's a legitimate question to say, what are you talking about? I'm sorry, it's a legitimate question. And then one of the rebuttals was, it's not our place to announce it. Exactly. Not your place to announce it. But you did. I don't hate anybody. I really don't. Do I get mad at people? Yes. Mostly mad at people I love the most. But I don't hate anybody. My mother, who was Catholic, the old-fashioned kind, that went to church on holy days and Good Friday, she used to put my kids and all her other grandkids in timeout whenever they used the word hate. That was a no-no. You would spend time in timeout. I can't imagine that anybody ran to work to be in the legislature and are motivated by hate. It's not why we're here. And because we have a difference, strongly held differences, and whether we are pro-life or choice or when we think life begins, they're firmly and strongly held, folks. It's not going to be over this year. It's not going to be over, maybe never. I don't know how to calm us down, but I can't, and I don't think it's wise for people to get up and say things that aren't true, have no backing, there's no evidence, and then, we don't respond. I would like not to respond. So I'm going to do one more thing. Again, this morning in the paper, yesterday, people said we were all scared. We scared. We ran out the back door because we were scared. No, we didn't. We were scared. I wasn't scared. I've spent 2 years in a war zone. I am not scared. But I am smart enough that when the police and the redcoats ask us to do something, they're protecting us. And for us to ignore them, they're the ones that will get hurt. Police are here to protect us. If we're dumb enough to go against their wishes, walk into a very intense situation, and somebody grabs us, then who's going to come get us and save us? It's them. So we walked out the back door because that's what security told us to do. That was most safe for them. And to ignore their request put them in danger. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Armendariz would like to announce, as most of them are leaving the north balcony, 80 fourth grade students from Pine Creek Elementary in Bennington, Nebraska. And hopefully they can hear us out in the rotunda. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, Senator Dorn, fellow Appropriations Committee member. I'm going to talk about the bill a little bit and give a little bit of recognition. I appreciate Senator Erdman earlier. I mean, I agree with him. Look, we're just doing our job, and that's the point. But I do think that there's an importance behind recognizing when you do the job that you're supposed to do. We all do our jobs in committees, but we're also being asked to navigate many, many different types of issues, come to consensus on issues. I think there's a recognition of a collective amount of work in addition to leadership from the chair. I think that is absolutely true. So we showed up, we have to do our job, but I think we found balance in ways that we normally don't. We also have not had 9-0 bills like this. This is not it's not standard, quite honestly. And sometimes we disagree to a point where there are dissenting votes. Sometimes we disagree to the point where we can't all get on board with the budget. So it is a recognition also to Chairman Clements, because whenever there's been an issue in regards to the budget, a bill, an agency issue, he has been open and willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to give thoughts and advice, and also willing to make the changes that are necessary in accordance with our precedent within the budget, and also on what's going to make sure that we reach our bottom line. What is helpful is when we talk about how we're trying to really get towards some of the targets that both the administration has shared, but also the targets that we're trying to do to get to not only a balanced budget, but having a certain amount in cash reserve. Now, some of this is what's out of the control of members of the Appropriations Committee, because it's going to be dependent on what everybody decides to do here on the floor in terms of their spending. That is completely up to everybody here. And we're going to see where it all lands. But in terms of what we put out, we are trying to make sure that we are balancing a lot of priorities. So for those that just remember, on page 22 in the green book, this is the significant general fund increases and reductions. I think Senator Clements or Chairman Clements mentioned this, that there are, we're around the 2.2% growth, which reminds you, when we're looking at the significant increases, these aren't superfluous things. These aren't new programs. These are increases to existing programs that are things that we really need to do. We talk about, look, we're spending more in education. I agree. But we're also doing that because we have to spend more in education to fund our schools. We're also talking about finally fulfilling more special education, not only because it's a priority of the governor, but when we're competing interests and all the things we have to do, we should be funding our education system. We should be funding providers when we talk about healthcare access. We should be funding our workforce in the form of higher education through the University of Nebraska, or state colleges, or community colleges, and our private college. We should be funding competitive scholarships like we're doing. We should equally be funding need-based grant aid like the Nebraska Opportunity Grant Program. These are things that we should be funding. And then we have these big one-time spends, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But in the spirit of getting something forward that I can live with, sort of the 70 or 80-20 rule, that's what gets us to this. And I appreciate the committee for that work. But I also want to make sure that the body and the public knows that the funds that we are putting forward in this are largely to programs and agencies that exist, and putting more money towards them because of need or because of thinking a little bit forward. In the future, if we're creating new programs, is either from the governor or for senators, that is going to increase the base budget. We can assume that most of these things are going to increase just because of salary, because of inflation, and our budget needs are just going to increase on its own. That there may not be room for new spending in the future unless something changes in terms of fiscal forecasts. But in this instance, I just want to make sure it's clear. There's really good things in here in terms of provider rates, in terms of, the rural, housing, rural development, making sure we're investing in water infrastructure that Senator Wishart talked about, making sure we're investing in East Omaha, on the East Side recovery funds that we put in here, making sure we're really investing in small and big business. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, returning to the issue that we began talking about earlier with regards to the building of a new prison, I direct your attention to anybody who is paying attention or anybody at home who's looking to page 90 of the final reading copy of the budget. So 90 and 91 are what take us through the appropriation for the construction of the new facility. We did some work previously between general and select file with Senator McKinney's amendment to add in some additional language on page 91, I believe is where you can find it, which requires that concurrent with that funding, there be 3 additional things that have to be done. One of those is that classification study has to be followed through with in an effort to actually determine essentially the needs of this facility. The other one is going to be a custody staffing analysis and an analysis of behavioral health staff for the facility. And then 3 is an evaluation of the programs as contracted pursuant to LB 896 with reports submitted electronically to the clerk of the legislature. I think that those 3 things are fantastic steps forward with regards to what needs to be done in terms of determining if we're going to build this prison, are we doing it in the correct way? But that being said, I don't think they go far enough. And what's, I think, disappointing is that this body has a report, which is the CJI report. I believe Senator Rabel talked about it earlier, maybe he's going to talk about it in a little bit. But it's a third-party entity that came in, and I'm sure people who pay attention to the legislature are sick of hearing about it at this point, who looked at our criminal justice system here in Nebraska, looked into our overcrowding problem, and recommended, based on data and based on information they'd gleaned, a host of suggestions, things that we can do as a state to further reduce our prison population. And so one of my major concerns with 814 and with allocating this money for the prisons is that we are not doing enough to address the underlying problem if we're just going to be throwing money at building this prison. And so I do think that the budget has gone a little bit further with the adoption of this McKinney amendment, Senator McKinney amendment, trying to require those analyses be done. But it doesn't, I think, go far enough. And that therein lies my issue. One of the specific things that I think needs to be explored that is talked about in the CJI study, and I'm going to talk about this probably again on the mic because I think this is a really vital thing that we focus on as a state, is recommendation number 4, which was expand alternatives to incarceration. So what we know, and this is again not an opinion, we hear a lot about facts versus opinion, what we know based on data and studies that have been done over decades is that incarceration is no more effective at reducing recidivism than alternatives to incarceration like probation. So if we can all get together and agree that one of our major goals here is ensuring that people don't recidivate or commit additional crimes and come back into the custody of the state, if we can all agree that's a good thing, we want to reduce recidivism, incarcerating people does not help us reach that goal. And what we need to be exploring as a state is finding ways to fund and better support alternatives to incarceration. There's 2 major things that I think we can focus on as alternatives to incarceration. I mean, there's many, but there's 2 that I'd like to specifically talk about. And it's something that I've talked about on the mic previously, and it's various programs, to sort of bifurcate it, you have diversion programs that we should be focusing on, and then you have problem-solving courts. So one of the biggest issues that we have, I think, when we talk about justice issues as a state and as a legislature is we don't understand the difference between those things. Problem-solving courts are different than diversion. And one of the things that I think we should be doing as a state is looking at ways to better support statewide diversion programs. So currently, for those who aren't familiar, diversion is a program where if you are charged with something and you meet certain criteria, you may be accepted into a diversion program where if you then ultimately complete the listed requirements of that diversion program, your case will be, your charges will be dismissed. So it's done before you enter a plea of guilty, before you have a trial.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, or anything like that. The issue is that we don't have any kind of statewide structure or statewide support for a comprehensive diversionary kind of program. What I mean by that is currently all of the diversion that exists in Nebraska is conducted at a county level and generally is administered solely by the county attorney's office. And so where you run into issues and where I've personally seen issues is diversion programs that don't have consistent criteria or that have to put it simply, too much discretion where people who I think could and should have been accepted into those diversionary programs, who would benefit from those diversionary programs, are denied. And so when we have this piecemeal approach to diversionary programs, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Bostoman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. I want to thank Senator Wishart for her comments earlier on the Perkins Canal, and also Senator Jacobson. I think they're both spot on. I would just want to put some things on the record here so we all understand the basics of where we're at with Perkins Canal, especially the feasibility study that was done and their work. Colleagues, we have provided funds for the Department of Natural Resources to evaluate the South Platte River beginning in 2019. They have used their own expertise as well as seeking out highly qualified consultants specializing in water supply analysis and the economics of water supply projects. I might also remind you that the director of the department is required by statute to have a set of unique set qualifications and work experience that allows them to provide the necessary expertise in addressing Nebraska's and the West complex water supply and legal frameworks. I would note that the department has sought out outside assistance on water supply and economics of the canal from two firms. The first, ERA Economics, is a nationally and internationally recognized group. According to their website, I'll quote, it says, "We develop rigorous, data-driven economic insights to support decision-making in the agriculture and water industries. At ERA Economics, we improve the agriculture's economies, resilience to drought and water scarcity, new environmental and water regulations, and uncertainties from a changing climate. Our primary areas of expertise include agricultural economics, water resources economics, agri-environmental policy, regulations, economic impact analysis and forecasting, mathematical modeling, water risk and water supply evaluation, and water market development." The ERA Economics report is on the department's website and corroborates the benefit costs of the Perkins Canal. Several of the authors I want to talk about right now. One is Dr. Howitt. He's a founding partner, senior principal economist. He is a leading expert on economics of irrigated agriculture and resource policy evaluation. He is from California, and he previously served on the advisory boards for the California Department of Water Resources and U.S. Academy of Sciences. The next is Dr. Hatchett, who is a senior principal economist. His primary focus is on assisting clients with integrated analysis, in which economics is integrated in hydrologic and engineering analysis. He has more than 30 years of experience in project evaluation, including financial analysis, rulemaking, support, benefit cost analysis, cost allocation, and so forth. The next is Dr. Mann. He's a senior principal economist. He has provided high-level research and process design for a variety of public, private, and NGO clients in California and other Western states. The next is Dr. McEwen, who is a major partner principal economist, who is an economist specializing in agriculture and water resources. The independent study performed by Zenjo that this body asked DNR to perform last year also included national experts. The primary author of the study has testified to the Appropriations Committee this past December. Their bios, or the information is attached. Mr. Tooley is an attorney from California with over 25 years of experience in surface and subsurface hydrology, law, and policy. Next one is Mr. Presler. He has a PE and a water master, a professional engineer and a water master. With over 30 long years of proven track record and advisory to complex water resource projects. His technical aspects of major water right projects, including hydrology, groundwater, stream flow, and watershed simulating modeling. I would note that the expert from the RFP for the study the legislature required DNR to conclude and complete in December 2022 included these consultant requirements.
1 minute.
By the way, I found that the RFP on DNR's website, in my read, LRO's report author would not have been able to meet the RFP requirements for expertise to conduct the study. The evaluation criteria for Nebraska DNR will evaluate the proposals based on the following evaluation criteria listed in order of importance. proposed approach of the scope of work, meeting the needs for project and delivered timeframes, expertise and technical understanding of current design standards and cost estimation techniques, demonstrated understanding of Platte River Basin water uses, return flows and water supply interconnections, demonstrated expertise and technical understanding of similar projects, project team experience in conducting each such evaluations. The NDR will plan to conduct interviews of up to 3 firms. Nebraska DNR will use the above evaluation criteria and its selections of the firms. Interviews will be held at
That's
the
your
DNR
time,
site.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to comment on another aspect of LB 814. In particular, I want to thank Chairman Clements and members of the Appropriation Committee for including in LB 814 a transfer of $20 million to the Rural Workforce Housing Investment Fund. I introduced LB 249 this year to tweak various aspects of the Rural Workforce Housing Program, and Senator Eibach prioritized this bill, and I thank her for doing that. The bill asked for $20 million for the program. In the amendment, we dropped the $20 million with the understanding the Appropriation Committee would include those dollars in the budget. And again, I thank them for doing that. And I also want to thank Senator Vargas for his work in this arena. The Rural Workforce Housing Program is a proven tool used by the state to develop workforce housing in rural areas, which are defined as those areas in counties of less than 100,000 inhabitants. Since its creation in 2017, the program has produced more than 800 units of housing in nearly 24 communities across the state. Where I come from, the average person is going to tell you the 3 top issues are property taxes, housing, and childcare. And I think it's fair to say that the lack of housing in rural Nebraska is choking off economic growth in our state. And the Rural Workforce Housing Program is one tool we can use to help address this issue. And again, it's an important tool. And again, I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for recognizing that and including those dollars in the budget. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee goes to a tremendous amount of work. They only serve on appropriations, no other committee. They have meetings outside of the session to put the budget together. And so if they stand to defend their work and they sound authoritative, I think they've earned that right to stick up for their work. If we're going to dispute it, we should have legitimate reasons to challenge that. I do appreciate their work, and I'm glad that they're willing to sacrifice themselves to bring that together. Also, I wanted to talk again about the change from 20 weeks to 12 weeks in the abortion bill. I know that was brought up this morning. According to the DHHS website, 90% of abortions currently happen before 12 weeks. So there are 10% of the abortions happen between week 12 and week 20. So that's the change in the abortion bill primarily, is that shortening of that window from 20 weeks to 12 weeks. And since people are allowed to have abortions in the first 12 weeks and under the bill, not after that up to week 20, a lot of people who are considering an abortion are going to move it forward so they can get it done within the 12 weeks. So that 90% could go up to 97, 95% of the abortions would happen before the bill has any effect on it. So the idea that this is an abortion ban or that doctors are going to go to jail, that's all political rhetoric. And we're all free to say whatever we want to say in the legislature. We have freedom of speech. We all have things we support. But to say that people should do anything and everything to fight a bill, I think is dangerous. I think that's political rhetoric that you see in Congress now. I think it's political rhetoric that caused the January 6th riots. The other night, somebody got assaulted. Well, they got assaulted with a piece of paper, depending on how the paper was applied to them or where. You know, it could be a cut, could be serious, but it could have been a lot worse. We should encourage people who support or don't support the work we do to lobby in a responsible manner and not get out of control and make sure nobody gets hurt. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moser. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Speaker Arch would move to invoke cloture on LB 814 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Speaker Arch, for what purpose do you rise?
Roll call vote.
Members, we are on final reading. Please find your seats. The question is the motion to invoke cloture. Been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Bosson, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, Senator Day, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, not voting. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holdcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, voting no. Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, not voting. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, not voting. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, not voting. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President, to invoke cloture.
Cloture is invoked. Members, the next vote is on the motion to return to select file to amend with AM 1740. There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting no. Senator Albright, voting no. Senator Arch, voting no. Senator Armendariz, voting no. Senator Ballard, voting no. Senator Blood, voting no. Senator Boston, voting no. Senator Bostar, voting no. Senator Bostelman, voting no. Senator Brandt, voting no. Senator Brewer, voting no. Senator Breezy, voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting no. Senator Conrad, Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting no. Senator DeKay, Voting no, Senator Dorn. Voting no, Senator Dover. Voting no, Senator Dungan. Voting no, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Frederickson. Voting no, Senator Holleran. Voting no, Senator Hansen. Voting no, Senator Hardin. Voting no, Senator Holcroft. Voting no, Senator Hughes. Voting no, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting no, Senator Jacobson. Voting no, Senator Kauth. Voting no, Senator Linehan. Voting no, Senator Lippincott. Voting no, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator McDonald. Voting no, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting no, Senator Merman. Voting no, Senator Raybold. Voting no, Senator Reapy. Voting no, Senator Sanders. Voting no, Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Vargas. Voting no, Senator Von Gillern. Voting no, Senator Walls. Voting no, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 2 ayes, 43 nays on the motion to return to select file, Mr. President.
The motion to return to select file fails. The next vote is the vote to dispense with the at-large reading. All those in favor? There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Boston. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Senator Day. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting no, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 45 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the motion to dispense with the at-large reading.
The at-large reading is dispensed with. Mr. Clerk, please read the title of the bill.
Engrossed Legislative Bill 814, introduced by Arch 14th, request to the governor, bill for enacting new appropriations. State intent to define terms to make appropriations for the expenses of the Nebraska state government for the biennium ending June 30th, 2025. To appropriate funds allocated to the state of Nebraska from the federal coronavirus state fiscal recovery fund pursuant to the federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, 42 USC 802 is amended to transfer funds to provide duties, to provide an operative date, and to declare an emergency.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 814 pass with the emergency clause? There is a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Voting yes. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Not voting, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Not voting, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting no, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, 3 nays, 4 present not voting, Mr. President, on the advancement of LB 814E.
LB 814 passes with the emergency clause. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Items, Mr. President, new LR 213 from Senator Ibach, 214 from Senator Ibach, both referred to the executive board. New LR from Senator Dungan, LR 215, 216, 217, 218, excuse me, just 215 and 216 from Senator Dungan, both referred to the executive board. New LR from Senator Boston, 217, referred to the executive board. LR 218 from Senator Blood, referred to the executive board. New LR from Senator Holleran, 219, also referred to the executive board. New LR 220, 221, 222, 223, 224 from Senator Brewer. New LR 225 from Senator Reapy. New LR 226 from Senator Aguilar, as well as 227, 228 from Senator Brandt, 229 from Senator Sanders, 230 from Wayne, 231 from Wayne, 232 from Senator Blood, 233 from Senator Blood, 234 from Senator Hansen, 235 from Senator Linehan, as well as 236, LR 237 from Senator Kauth, 238 from Senator McDonald, as well as 239, LR 240 from Senator Merman. Those will all be referred to the executive board, as well as LR 241 from Senator Wishart, also referred to the executive board. New amendment amendment to be printed from Senator Slama, AM 1767 to LB 92. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Breezy is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. My office has received word from the Reviser of Statutes office that all three-part requests for interim studies that were submitted prior to the drafting deadline have been received or are currently en route to your offices. If your office has not yet received a three-part for an interim study that you requested previously, please contact the Reviser of Statutes office as soon as possible. If your office submitted an interim study request after the drafting deadline, those requests are currently being processed and should be completed by approximately 11:30. For those requests, three parts will be promptly delivered to your office upon completion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 814 with the emergency clause. Members, please return to your seats for a final reading.
Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, final reading LB 818E from Senator Arch. First of all, Senator Clements would move to recommit the bill to the Appropriations Committee.
Senator Clemens, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I don't intend this to go back to the Appropriations Committee. I can breathe easy, Appropriations Committee members. After 4.5 months of work, I'm using this motion so I can start and discuss what's in this bill briefly, and then I welcome other people to get in and make comments. This is Cash Reserve Fund bill, mainly it's called. LB 818 was actually for transferring funds between general funds and cash funds and cash reserve funds. 819 was the cash reserve fund bill. We've combined those two into this one LB 818. In your budget book, the green budget book, it has a cash reserve fund table on page 3, but the green sheet that you have today, well, that was when this book came out. Now, there have been some changes since then. On the green sheet, the lower section shows the cash reserve fund, and it shows the items that have come out of it and adjustments, a couple items into it. But in the budget book, in pages 4, 5, and 6, have details of some of the major items that were in it. There's the road operations cash fund, the $100 million we've discussed before for the federal match. And I think I talked about a 20% match. I think that was an error, 25% match. So it's going to provide us $300 million of federal funds and $100 million of our funds for $400 million of road funding. There's a capital construction fund, and that shows the $95.8 million toward the new correction facility. Then on page 5 and page 6, you'll find some more other items in there. The Perkins County Canal is on page 6. There's a discussion on that where the original proposal was for $449 million, but we found it advantageous. That would, for 500 cubic feet per second, we found it advantageous to increase to 1,000 cubic feet per second, which was a 28% more expense for 100% more capacity, and that's why 574.5 million you will find on. They don't have line numbers, but it's about 1, 2, 3, about 5 or 6 lines down under fiscal year 23-24. You'll see Perkins Canal on the green sheet. There's rural workforce housing, I see $20 million. Middle income housing, $20 million. Economic recovery contingency, that's the economic recovery project, is East Omaha. And involved in that they had $180 million of ARPA funds that's now going to be reduced from that project and switched over to the new water supply for Lincoln. And then that 180 is going to be replaced with general funds for East Omaha project. And let's see, those are the main items that you'll see. There's a shovel-ready capital recovery fund, $90 million there. And the third column on the green sheet under fiscal year 2024-25 is showing $780 million would be the ending balance in the cash reserve if this bill is adopted today. And I was appreciated Senator Dorn earlier talking about the history of the cash reserve, that it's been many years that it's been much lower than 780 million. And working with the governor's office, they feel that would be adequate at this point. And I've been very appreciative again of working with the Legislative Fiscal Office and the analysts who help us with each agency and their needs and their details, and wanted to thank all of the Appropriations Committee members for their long hours and their hard work and buying lunch for the group when it was their turn, and appreciated that we had no conflicts. We occasionally disagreed, but very minor times, and we passed this bill out of committee 9-0. And I am very pleased to offer this cash reserve and transfer fund bill to you. And I thank you, Mr. President. I withdraw my motion.
It is withdrawn. Senator, Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, LB 813, Senator Hansen would move to return for select file. Senator Kavanaugh, would move to return to select file for a specific amendment, that being FA 134.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on that motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I realized that I never actually discussed what my amendment was on the last bill, 814. And it was a serious amendment, but it's something that I had introduced on other rounds of debate. And since we really can't pull something back, we can't pull the budget back on final today, I genuinely wasn't going to lobby for it because we need to pass the budget today because today is day 80. And so pulling something back from final to select to attach an amendment would, I don't know what it would do. Would it cause a constitutional crisis? It's in our rules. Unclear. Anywho, I am an agent of chaos, but not that chaos. But the amendment that I had put up on 814 was for TANF. It was to take the funds that we appropriated for the child advocacy centers out of TANF and put it into general funds. So it just occurred to me when everybody was voting no, which normally I would be like, yeah, vote no on whatever I got up there, that under other circumstances, I would have been encouraging people to vote for. But we passed 814, so funsies for the child advocacy centers, that's going to be a real journey. Hopefully it doesn't cost us a $5 million penalty for being out of compliance with the federal regulations on TANF. But we're very spendy in this body, so we probably don't care that much. I care. But yeah, I find that I care about things that a lot of people in this body don't care about. I did find it a little bit interesting that of all the topics that I covered this morning on the microphone and all the topics that people felt very much compelled to respond to, rebuttal, lift up, whatever. No one felt compelled to respond to or lift up when I talked about being physically assaulted by male members of the body. That one just slipped on by. Slipped on by, but that's cool. Makes sense. On brand. I don't even know what this is. It's to strike section 1 or something, probably. So I guess we can see what striking section 1 is. So I switched desks this year. I used to be in the desk at Senator Days and switched desks to here. And I don't know at what point in time I lost track of my tracker, because I had a piece of paper where I kept track of all the times that inappropriate touching happened on the floor of the legislature. Dates, times, individuals, that kind of thing. So, but that doesn't elevate or rise to the occasion of conversation from my colleagues, but talking about their drinking habits does. Your Nebraska legislature, our priorities are clear all of the time. All of the time. So, all right, 818. I'm sure, however, there will be criticism of the fact that I don't know what the amendment does. We've spent a lot of brain power this morning getting on the mic and verbally tearing me down and ignoring. All right, so striking section 1. The state treasurer shall transfer, not funds, just reading words that aren't there. The state treasurer shall transfer an amount as directed by the budget administrator of the budget division of the Department of Administrative Services pursuant to subsections 2 and 3 of section 82-331, not to exceed $1 million from the general fund to the Nebraska Cultural Preservation Endowment Fund on December 31, 2023, or as soon thereafter as administratively possible. There you go. That's what strikes. So, I don't know. I mean, again, it's the Cultural Endowment Preservation Fund, so I don't want to strike that. Also, don't vote for the motion to return to select, because that would be chaos, but maybe you like chaos. And we are in chaos. Chaos is in the eye of the beholder, and the eye of this beholder is that we are in chaos. Other beholders don't think that. We are Nebraska. According to me, the world according to me, we are in chaos. You can take that or leave that, but we are. People are drinking, people are disappearing. There's like not even low grade shade happening. There's all kinds of retribution happening legislatively. All kinds. There's all kinds of shenanigans where your leaders in this body are doing things, subversive things, to people who oppose LB 574 in this body. Yeah. And I plan on unpacking those. I'm not just gonna vague book it. I will unpack it, but I'm gonna unpack it as we get to those bills. And right now we're not on that. Well, maybe we are. I have no idea. This is a cash transfers bill, so probably not. But there are going to be bills, and let me just telegraph for you, they're mostly going to be revenue bills that are riddled with retribution. Riddled with retribution. So when we get to those bills, I look forward to unpacking that. We are in chaos. We are in pettiness. We are in policies, political theater. Yes, political theater. Of course it's political theater. What I said this morning, panic porn, I think it was called. Okay. It's not political theater. It is the reality. And I want the people in the state who are going to be impacted by the vote tomorrow to know what the reality is and to know the urgency of it. And it's not a 12-week ban. It's a 10-week ban. So stop lying to people. It is a 10-week ban. And it is serious, and it is a crisis. And yes, 90% of abortions are before 12 weeks. We're talking about a 10-week ban. 90% are before that. The ones that are after that, 99% of those are for saving the life of the mother. They are medically necessary. You're banning health care. You're banning health care. So, I don't know. Yesterday, I said that yesterday was Festivus. Apparently, I lied. Today is Festivus. Yesterday, I only aired grievances for a short while, but the grievances have grown. So today is like bonus Festivus. Although we did have discussion of feats of strength, Senator Mosier did talk about lifting half of a 500-pound piano. So we did have that feats of Festivus yesterday. Hopefully we can have some feats of strength conversation today. Not actual feats of strength, please. That would, I don't even know what that would look like, but probably not appropriate inside the chamber. Because, well, first of all, everything is bolted down. So any feats of strength on that end would be probably somebody throwing their back out trying to lift up a desk or a chair. I guess not everything is bolted down. The furniture off to the side is not bolted down, but still, let's not with the feats of strength, please. There was concern expressed over my telling the public to do whatever it is they wanted to do to try and advocate for the policy in opposition to LB 574 tomorrow. And so I will be crystal clear that I never would advocate for violence in any way, shape, or form.
1 minute.
And I would very much admonish anyone who would incite violence or who would enact violence. It is not, well, first of all, it's illegal. It's a crime. And second of all, it's not helpful. And there's nothing productive to come out of it. What I mean by do anything and everything is within the confines of the law, and mostly what I mean is exercising your right to free speech. Show up. Even if your senators refuse repeatedly to come out and talk to you, show up anyways. Don't let them erase you. Show up. Not violently, peacefully, but use your voice and show up. That's what I mean. So just to be clear, peaceful organizing, freedom of speech.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Raybould, you're next.
Thank you,
in the
Mr.
queue.
President. Thank you, Mr. President. I feel remiss that I did not thank Senator Clemens and the entire Appropriations Committee for their hard work this year. And I do appreciate all the work they've done, and I'm thankful for moving forward on many important issues. But I did want to get back to something that Senator Mosier had said about the language that we use. And I agree with that. I think language, particularly language that we use in our legislative bills, is vital. And it's not fear-mongering, but it's actual language that we put in Legislative Bill 574 that has raised all kinds of red flags and alarms for families, for their children, for physicians, and all those that are involved in the medical practice of helping reproductive health and gender-affirming care. And so I'm going to have you go look with me on the mashup of LB 574 and LB 626. On page 15, line 7, it says the intentional annoying performance of gender-altering procedures by a healthcare practitioner for an individual younger than 19 years of age in violation of subsection 1 of this section shall be considered unprofessional conduct as defined in section 38-179. You heard me talk about the sanctions earlier, talking about physicians who perform an unlawful abortion. These healthcare practitioners for gender affirming care are also subject to those same strict guidelines. Going further down on page 15 in line 18, it talks about the chief medical officer as designated in section shall adopt and promulgate such rules and regulations as are necessary to provide for non-surgical gender altering procedures for individuals. But such rules and regulations shall be consistent with Let Them Grow Act. And it goes on with listing minimums. But I think that language in itself, we're ceding our authority as a legislative body to come up with rules and regulations that are appropriate. And is this chief medical officer going to even have a scope of practice? And that is of concern to us. So and then going further down on page 16, if you look at line 28, Senator McKinney, will you be available for questions? You're up next. I'll be brief. I'm going to wrap this up. On page 16, line 28, it also talks about family members that will be subject to civil penalties, including their children. And so for that reason, I think we need to be concerned about that. Not only financial issues, but they will be subject to other penalties and other rules and regulations as determined by our chief medical officer. So I wanted to get back to something that I know Senator McKinney is an expert on. And, it comes to something that he handed out to each and every one of us on the Nebraska criminal justice system. And I know that they list a lot of policies and priorities that would be not only cost effective, but help reduce our overcrowding. And so, Senator McKinney, will you yield to a couple of questions?
Senator McKinney, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
So, Senator McKinney, I know you have been involved in this, and there were some policy recommendations that specifically say they can save more than 300 prison beds by 2030 by implementing all 4 policy recommendations described above. Can you tell me, have we taken action on thank you, Mr. Reserve mandatory minimum sentences for violent and serious offenses? Have we done any changes to that?
No, to date, we haven't moved on any criminal justice related policy changes. Hopefully next week we move forward with LB 50, but to date, nothing has happened.
Nothing has happened. And it goes on about reduce the use of discretionary consecutive sentencing. It also talks about another policy initiative that would also reduce 100 prison beds by 2030. Have we created a misdemeanor level for possession of residue of a controlled substance, like a trace residue?
No, we haven't. County attorneys want to charge people with felonies for residue, so we haven't moved on that yet.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. The one thing I hope we continue, and I know Senator Armendariz is on the Appropriations Committee and is proposing a really cost-effective measure.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Raybold and McKinney. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I oppose FA 134 and support LB 818. I got a few questions and concerns about it, but I also know that you can't fight City Hall, literally, and that would just fall on deaf ears, so I'm just going to stay quiet on that. But clearly, we are helping to filibuster and talking about the bills and other bills, and I just want to kind of contribute to that. And I've been sitting and listening for 2 days, and I'm just going to kind of go down my list and talk about some of the things that you may not know historically and some of my concerns. So I heard Senator Lowe yesterday, and he ended up on NPR, so I had to hear it twice, talking about how supposedly legislation is now about feelings, and it's not about policy, but it's about feelings. I want to do the Lowe voice. You know, Senator Lowe, you and I have been here long enough that we know darn good and well that that is used frequently, especially when talking about bodily autonomy. I remember our first 4 years together when, and I mean this respectfully, I am not making fun of these women, when there was a bill in reference to birth certificates for women who had had miscarriages. And Senator Brosh and Senator Linehan and Senator Albright all made they shared personal stories on the mic. and teared up, and it was all about feelings when we talked about that bill. But I don't remember you calling them down on it. And you know why we don't do that? Because it's not very nice. So yes, sometimes we talk about feelings, especially when we talk about women's issues, because we live it every day, friend. And quite frankly, it always kind of turns my stomach a little bit when you want to talk about women's issues, because I still remember that you didn't know how many times a year a man was fertile. So there's a video out on the internet that verifies that. The fact that people keep referring to January 6th and what happened with the trans kids out in the lobby out here, out in the rotunda, is kind of ridiculous. But good on you for trying to change that narrative and making it something scary for folks. I'm going to say this again. I've said it multiple times. This is a 10-week ban because it starts with menses and not fertilization, as Senator Reepe's bill did. And you guys really need to start talking about the difference between an abortionist and an OBGYN, because this new bill does not apply to anomalies. And so you've created a crisis for OBGYNs, for our doctors. There is a difference between abortionists, like Dr. Carhart, who has passed away, and OBGYN who needs to do it for a medical reason. And you got to stop pretending that that's not so. Let's talk about being drunk on the floor of the legislature. You guys all know that I keep notes, and I remember when we amended LB 720 and LB 1107, and I think you guys all remember it as the Imagine Nebraska Act. And I remember being on the floor and somebody was talking really loudly, and because we have so many gentlemen with hearing aids, I thought someone's hearing aid battery had gone out, and I went to the speaker and I said, you need to go and tell, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, I'm just going to tell this story. You need to tell this particular senator that I think his hearing aid is going out because he's talking really loudly. And the speaker's like, no, they're just drunk. They went down to Billy's to celebrate the passing of the bill.
1 minute.
And he's going to have to go home. And I don't know if Senator Vargas remembers this, but he tried to jump on your back. It happened over here. I don't know if you remember that, but you know, people go and they celebrate and they come, and yeah, I'll tell you about it after I get off the mic. And it happens. And unfortunately, not everybody agrees with it, but you know, sometimes they've been here all day long, they're tired, they want to go celebrate. And I'm going to get back in the queue because there's several other things I need to talk about that I want to address. And I'm sorry for Senator Brewer that his voter ID that he's worked so hard on is now being challenged, because I know that he was limited on what he was allowed to kick out this year, which I actually opposed because he had a lot of great bills in government this year, and I think I had one or two that are never going to be heard by this body, at least not this part of the biennium. But friends, there are people who sit and listen just like I do all day long to the debate.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 818 and against the motion to return the bill to select file. And again, I want to thank, I think this is the last time I'll be on the mic, to thank Chairman Clemens and the members of the Appropriations Committee for our hard work on this effort. It really, truly has been a really good experience, and I appreciate it all. I have talked with the chair that I do have concerns about the drawdown of the rainy day funds beyond the 16% that I would argue we really need to be at for rainy day. And so I think it's going to be important that this body next year recognizes that and looks to put additional money into our savings account. And I will sure be working as a member of the Appropriations Committee to look at doing that. But this is a year where there's a lot of important obligations, and so I will be supporting this budget. Colleagues, it's rare that I speak about another subject on a bill that is different from the underlying policy, but today is a bittersweet day. At noon, I will be part of a group that is filing a ballot initiative to put medical cannabis on the ballot for the 2024 election for Nebraskans to have finally an opportunity to vote on this issue. And the reason I bring it before this body is that we had a chance this year to pass a narrowly crafted piece of legislation that would have safely allowed for individuals with severe medical conditions to have access, and that bill couldn't get out of committee. And so now we're left, again, as a group of individuals across the state, having to take this issue to the people. And I know from experience, colleagues, from qualifying counties from Burwell to Stanton to Wheeler and all across the state, myself, that this issue is supported by Nebraskans, and now we have a year and a half to get enough signatures and to put this on the ballot. But the reason I say it's bittersweet is there was one of the most incredible people I've ever gotten a chance to meet sitting under the balcony today. And her name is Krista Eggers. And she is the mom of a son who has severe epilepsy, for which the medical community, including one of the leading medical facilities in our country, the Mayo Clinic, has said cannabis could potentially save his life. And this is what she texted with me this morning, and I want to read it because it's important for her to have a voice. I'm not going to lie. I'm having a lot of emotions about this all. I know you understand. I'm feeling a lot of anger this morning. I laid watching Colton, my son, sleep last night, and all I could think is, what if while I'm out fighting for others, I lose him? I feel so failed by our state. Their inaction has forced a mom to now spend the next 14 months fighting with all I have for something that should have been done already. Meanwhile, I'm scared to death that my baby, the one I started out to fight for in the beginning, won't be here when I end it. Colleagues, we could have done something this year. We could have done a narrow bill. And now what we're going to do is a broad medical cannabis legalization ballot initiative. And I think it's important that we all hear that, because we do have a chance as leaders to have a massive impact, but also to do something and to compromise and to do something that is comfortable for everybody. And I think this was a missed opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, bills presented to the governor, LB 814E, was presented on May 18, 2023 at 11:34 a.m. New LR for Senator Jacobson, LR 242, Senator Sanders, LR 243, Senator Day, LR 244, Senator Vargas, LR 245, Senator Linehan 246, John Kavanaugh 247, and 248, all referred to the executive board. Notice that the Education Committee will hold an executive session in room 1525 upon recess. Education Committee 1525, exec session upon recess. Additionally, the Government Committee will hold an executive session today at noon in room 1524. Government, noon, 1524, exec session. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Armendariz moved to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, nay. We are in recess.